Hello, I'm Sister Maria Benedetta. I'm 47 years old, and for the past 18 years, I've carried a secret that has both tormented and transformed me from within. A secret that began on a cold November night in 2006 in the Perpetual Adoration Chapel of Sant Eustachio in Rome, when I witnessed something that defies every law of nature and logic, something that forever changed my understanding of death, heaven in the very essence of divine love. Before I continue, I need to know something crucial. Where are you watching this from? United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Please write it in the comments because I need to know this message is reaching exactly who it's supposed to reach. And if this is your first time on this channel, please subscribe right now, because what I'm about to tell you isn't just another story. It's a testimony that could completely revolutionize your understanding of faith, miracles, and what truly happens when a pure soul leaves this world. Let me take you back to who I was before that November night. In 2006, I was 29 years old and had been a religious sister for 7 years with the Franciscan Sisters of Divine Mercy. I had entered the convent at 22, fresh from university, with a master's degree in art history that I thought I'd never use again. My vocation emerged after a profound spiritual experience during a pilgrimage to Lourdes, where I felt with absolute clarity that God was calling me to a life of prayer and contemplative service. But by 2006, that initial clarity had completely evaporated. My religious life had become mechanical, empty, devoid of any real spiritual connection. I followed all the rules, attended every community prayer, fulfilled my vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience with military precision. But inside, I was spiritually dead. Prayer had become meaningless words echoing in my head. Mass was a ritual I observed from the outside, like watching my own spiritual life through thick glass. The worst part was that nobody knew. Outwardly, I was the perfect sister, always punctual, always obedient, always serene. But every night in my cell, in the darkness, I wept, asking myself if I had wasted my life, if God truly existed. If all of this wasn't just an elaborate system of comforting beliefs we invented to endure the harshness of human existence. My assignment at that time was the night adoration shift at Sant Eustachio. Every Tuesday and Friday, from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m., I was the guardian of perpetual Eucharistic adoration. 6 hours alone before the Blessed Sacrament, in a dimly lit chapel illuminated only by candles and the sanctuary lamp. For many sisters, this shift was a privilege, a time of profound intimacy with the Lord. For me, it had become torture, 6 interminable hours where my mind wandered, where I fought against sleep, where I pretended to pray while internally questioning everything. But during those night shifts, throughout several months of 2006, I began to notice a boy who came regularly. He was a teenager, slender, about 14 or 15 years old, always in jeans and casual sweaters, nothing flashy. The first thing that caught my attention was that he came alone at very early hours, when most teenagers are sleeping or glued to their computers. He would arrive around 4:30 a.m., just before dawn began to break. The first time I saw him was a Tuesday in September. I was in my usual seat, in the back left pew from where I could see the entire chapel. It was 4:35 a.m. The chapel was completely empty except for me. Suddenly I heard the side door open softly. This boy entered, blessed himself with holy water, made a profound genuflection toward the tabernacle, and sat in the front pew, directly facing the Blessed Sacrament. What struck me wasn't simply that he came, but how he prayed. It wasn't the restless, distracted prayer of teenagers who come out of family obligation. It was something completely different. He remained completely still, eyes fixed on the tabernacle, with an expression of absolute joy on his face. I don't exaggerate when I say joy. It was a genuine smile, as if he was seeing someone he deeply loved. as if he were in real conversation with a visible presence. He would remain like that for 40 to 50 minutes, without moving, without getting distracted. Occasionally, he would close his eyes and move his lips silently. Then he would make another genuflection, bless himself again, and leave as silently as he had entered. This happened repeatedly for weeks, 2 or 3 times per week, always the same hours, always the same intense devotion. I never spoke to him. In night adoration, there exists an unwritten code of absolute silence, but I observed him, intrigued, even somewhat annoyed. Here was this 15-year-old boy experiencing such a real, tangible presence of God, while I, a consecrated religious with 7 years of convent life, felt absolutely nothing. It was as if he had access to a spiritual dimension that was completely closed to me. One early morning in October, something different happened. The boy arrived as always around 4:30, but this time he didn't sit in his usual pew. Instead, after making his genuflection, he stood looking directly toward where I was sitting in the shadows. He shouldn't have been able to see me. The candlelight didn't reach that far. But he looked directly at me and smiled, a warm smile, as if he had known me forever. Then he did something that left me completely bewildered. He walked directly towards me, sat in the pew in front of me, turned around, and with a low but clear voice said, "Sister Maria, may I speak with you after my prayers? I have something important to tell you. Not for me, but for you. God asked me to come today specifically to speak with you." I was frozen. How did he know my name? I didn't wear identification during night shifts. We had never exchanged words. But what really disturbed me was, God asked me to come speak with you. Another adolescent mystic, I thought cynically. I had known dozens of people who claimed God spoke to them directly. "All right," I finally whispered, more out of curiosity than conviction. "I'll wait here when you finish." He nodded, smiled again, and returned to his pew facing the tabernacle. For the next 45 minutes he prayed with the same intensity as always, while I watched him with a mixture of skepticism and unease. Finally he rose, made his genuflection, and returned to my pew. He sat beside me, respectfully leaving space between us, and said, "My name is CARLO Acutis. I'm 15 years old. I've been coming here almost every morning since I was 12, because the Eucharist is the most important thing in my life. Jesus is truly present there." He pointed toward the tabernacle, "as real as you and I are here now." There was something in his way of speaking, a combination of natural youth and profound wisdom that didn't match his age. He wasn't pretentious or presumptuous. He was simply genuine. "Carlo," I responded in my most professional religious tone, "it's beautiful that you have such devotion at your age, but you said God asked you to speak with me specifically. About what?" He looked directly into my eyes and said, "Sister Maria, God showed me that you're suffering. 2 nights ago, during adoration in my room, I saw a clear image of you in my mind. You were crying in a small room on your knees, telling God that you can't feel him, that maybe all of this is a lie, that perhaps you've wasted your life." My blood froze. It was exactly what had happened the previous Saturday in my cell. Exactly those words. "Maybe all of this is a lie. Maybe I've wasted my life." Nobody could know this, absolutely nobody. The convent walls are thick. My cell is isolated. It was past midnight. How? My voice came out as a hoarse whisper. "I don't know how," Carlo said with genuine humility. "Sometimes God shows me things. Not always, not all the time. But when he does, it's very clear. And when he showed me that about you, he also told me to come tell you something important." He paused, as if carefully considering his words. "Sister Maria, God wants you to know that your spiritual dryness doesn't mean he isn't present. Actually, it's the opposite. He's allowing you to go through this dark night because he's preparing you for something important. something that will happen soon, something that will require you to be a living witness of faith in the midst of doubt, of light in the midst of darkness. What's going to happen? I asked, my skepticism now mixed with desperate need to believe. I can't tell you exactly what, but I can tell you when. In exactly 21 days on November 15th, something will happen that will completely change your understanding of faith. That day, Sister Maria, you will see with your own eyes that death is not the end, that heaven is real, that the saints live, and that Jesus in the Eucharist is as real as I'm telling you. His voice was so serene, so certain, that for a moment I completely forgot my cynicism. Before I could respond, he stood up. I have to go. My mother is waiting outside. She brings me by car every morning, though she doesn't come in because she prefers to let me have this time alone with Jesus. He started to walk away, but then stopped and turned around. Oh, one more thing, Sister Maria. Don't be afraid when it happens. What you're going to see is a gift, not a ghost. It's proof of God's love for you specifically. And with that, he left. I remained seated in that pew for the next 20 minutes, completely paralyzed, my mind trying to process what had just happened. How did he know my name? How did he know about my Saturday crisis? And what on earth was going to happen on November 15th? The following days were strange. Carlo didn't return to the chapel, at least not during my shifts. I counted the days, both dreading and anticipating November 15th. Was it all imagination? Spiritual delirium? But I couldn't deny that he had known things that were impossible to know. And then November 12th, 2006 arrived. That day was my day off from night adoration. I was at the convent participating in our evening community prayers when Mother Superior, Sister Francesca, gathered us after dinner with a grave expression. "Sisters," she said with a trembling voice, "I just received a call from San Rafael Hospital in Milan. A young parishioner who sometimes visited our chapel, CARLO ACUTIS, died this morning from fulminant leukemia. He was only 15 years old. His family is requesting that some of us attend the wake tomorrow and the funeral the day after." The world stopped. Carlo, my Carlo from the morning adorations, dead at 15 years old from leukemia, and I didn't even know he was sick. Tears began rolling down my cheeks uncontrollably, which surprised my sisters because I was known for my emotional composure. But it wasn't just sadness over his death. It was something deeper, more disturbing. He had told me, in exactly 21 days, November 15th, something will happen. That was in 3 days, and now he was dead. That night I couldn't sleep. I stayed in my cell on my knees, praying, crying, asking God why he had taken that extraordinary boy, that teenage saint who loved the Eucharist more than anyone I had ever known. If you've made it this far, I need you to do something for me. Subscribe to this channel right now, because what I'm going to tell you next challenges every rational explanation. And also, leave me a sign that you're following this story. Write in the comments a heart emoji if you feel Carlo is interceding for you right now as you watch this. Because brother, sister, saints didn't stop working miracles. We're just too blind to see them. On November 13th, I attended Carlo's wake at the Church of San Bernardino alle Ossa in Milan. It was one of the most moving and perplexing experiences of my life. The casket was open, and there was Carlo, dressed in jeans and a blue Nike sweater, exactly as I had seen him dozens of times in the chapel. His face had extraordinary peace, a soft smile, as if he was simply sleeping after a happy day. But what really struck me was the number of people, especially young people. The church was completely filled with teenagers and young adults, many crying openly. One by one, they approached the casket, touched his hand, whispered things to him. I heard fragments of their words. "Thank you for teaching me to love Jesus. I'll never forget when you explained the Eucharistic miracles to me. Now you're with him for real." I approached his mother, Andrea Acutis, an elegant woman about 45 years old with red eyes from crying so much. "Signora Acutis," I said gently, "I'm Sister Maria from Sant'Eustachio. Your son came frequently to our adoration chapel." Her eyes lit up with recognition through the tears. "Are you the sister from night adoration? Carlo spoke about you. He told me a few days ago that he needed to speak with a religious sister who was going through a crisis of faith, that God had shown him something important about her." My heart began beating violently. Did he say anything else? Only that God was going to give her a powerful sign, proof. Carlo always said things like that. From childhood he had these insights, these intuitions. Doctors would say it was developed emotional intuition, but I know it was more than that. It was a gift. We talked for several minutes. She told me that Carlo had been diagnosed with fulminant leukemia only 8 days before, that the disease had progressed with devastating speed, that even in his final days he kept talking about Jesus in the Eucharist, about how he couldn't wait to see him face to face finally. Do you know what the last thing he said was? Andrea asked me, tears flowing freely. He said, "Mom, I'm happy to go to heaven, but I'm also happy because now I'll be able to help many more people from there than I could help here." He was 15 years old, sister, 15 years old, and spoke about death as if it were a job promotion. That night back at the convent, I couldn't attend community prayers. I stayed in my cell, completely overwhelmed. Tomorrow was November 15th, the day Carlo had mentioned specifically. Something will happen that will completely change your understanding of faith. You will see with your own eyes that death is not the end. What had he meant? How could he prove that now that he was dead? Unless... No, that couldn't be. That was impossible. That night I barely slept. I finally fell asleep around 2 a.m., only to wake abruptly at 3:30 with a clear thought, almost a voice in my head. Go to the chapel now. I dressed quickly in my habit and walked through the empty streets of Rome toward Sant'Eustachio. It was my regular adoration shift that night anyway, but I normally started at 11 p.m. Now it was almost 4 a.m., the same time Carlo used to arrive. When I arrived at the church, everything was in absolute silence. The adoration chapel is in a side wing of the main church, accessible through a side door that never closes because adoration is perpetual, 24 hours. I entered, blessed myself with holy water, and opened the inner door leading to the chapel. The chapel was empty, illuminated only by votive candles and the red sanctuary lamp indicating the Eucharistic presence. It was exactly 4:35 a.m., the precise time Carlo used to arrive. I took my usual seat in the back left pew and began to pray, or rather tried to pray. My mind was racing. Why had I come? What did I expect to see? A miracle? A vision? I felt foolish, like a child waiting for Santa Claus to appear on Christmas. And then I heard them. Footsteps. Clear, defined footsteps coming from the side corridor. Footsteps I would recognize anywhere after months of hearing them. That characteristic teenage gait, not dragging feet, but not hurried either, with a particular rhythm. My heart stopped. The footsteps approached the chapel door. The handle turned slowly. The door opened, and there stood Carlo. It wasn't a transparent apparition like in movies. He wasn't glowing with supernatural light. He was completely solid, real, tangible. He wore exactly the same clothes he had in the casket, jeans and the blue Nike sweater. His face had that same peace, that same soft smile. His brown eyes looked directly at me. I wanted to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out. My body was completely paralyzed, not from fear exactly, but from such profound amazement that it canceled all other functions. My rational mind screamed, "This is impossible! He's dead! You saw his body yesterday!" But my eyes saw what they saw. Carlo blessed himself with holy water, exactly as he always did. He walked to the front of the chapel, made his profound genuflection towards the tabernacle, and then, instead of sitting in his usual pew, walked directly toward me. He sat in the pew in front of me, turned to look at me, and smiled. "Hello, Sister Maria," he said in a completely normal voice, not ethereal or ghostly, but his natural teenage voice. "I told you that you would see on November 15th. I told you not to be afraid." Tears began rolling down my face uncontrollably. "Carlo," I finally managed to whisper, "you died." "Yes," he responded with that direct simplicity that characterized him. "I died on November 12th at 8:42 in the morning. But Sister Maria, death is not what you think. It's not an end, it's a beginning. It's like when you finish elementary school and go to high school. You're still you, just at a different level of existence." "Why?" I asked, my voice broken by emotion. "Why are you here? Why can I see you?" "Because you needed to see. You're like St. Thomas. You need to touch the wounds to believe. God loves you so much that He's giving you what you need. But it's not just for you, Sister Maria. It's for many people who will hear your testimony years later." "My testimony?" I asked, confused. "At the right time, you will tell this story. When you do, thousands of people will recover their faith. People who are on the verge of giving up, who think all this is just psychology and ritual, will see through your testimony that the supernatural world is real." I was speechless, only silent tears rolling down my cheeks. "I have little time," Carlo continued, "because these appearances require special permission and spiritual energy. But I need to tell you 3 important things before I go." He stood up and came to sit next to me on my pew, maintaining respectful distance. I could see every detail of his face, the texture of his sweater. I could even smell a slight aroma of flowers like fresh lilies that came from nowhere logical. "First thing," Carlo said, "your crisis of faith wasn't weakness, it was preparation. God allows these dark nights of the soul to purify our faith so that we don't depend on feelings, but on deep conviction. You're going to need that purified faith because you're going to face something difficult in approximately 3 years." "What?" I immediately asked. "In 2009, your nephew Marco, your sister's youngest son, is going to be in a terrible motorcycle accident. The doctors will say he has severe brain trauma, that he'll never wake up from the coma. The family will lose all hope after 2 months. But you, Sister Maria, are going to pray with a faith you didn't know you had. A faith forged in this dark night you're living now. And Marco will wake up against all medical prognosis. Not only will he wake up, but he'll have no brain damage. The doctors won't be able to explain it." My nephew Marco was 17 years old at that time, completely healthy, as far as I knew. The idea that he could have a terrible accident in 3 years was devastating, but Carlo spoke with such certainty. "How can you know that?" I asked. "Because in heaven, linear time doesn't exist like here. There, past, present, and future are like an open book. I can see the important events of your life because they've already happened from eternity's perspective, even though for you in time, they haven't occurred yet." It was a concept that made my brain twist, but strangely, it made sense. "Second thing," Carlo continued, "in 2012, a young man named Luca will come to your chapel. He'll be 22 years old, comes from a completely atheist family, studying computer science, but he's going through a severe depression and has planned his suicide for Christmas Eve. He'll come to the chapel that night not to pray, but to say goodbye to the God he doesn't believe in before ending his life. But you'll be there during your night shift, and you'll see him crying. You'll approach him, share this testimony I'm giving you now, and that will save his life. Not only will it save his life, but Luca will become a priest, and by 2025 will have founded a digital ministry that reaches millions of young people worldwide with the gospel message." I took mental note of every word. If everything else Carlo was saying was true, then these things would be too. Third thing, and this is the most important, Carlo said, his voice becoming more serious. In 2020, I will be beatified by the Catholic Church. My body will be found incorrupt. Millions of young people around the world will discover my story and begin asking for my intercession. When that happens, Sister Maria, that's the moment you should begin sharing this testimony. Why wait until then? I asked. Because before that moment, people would think you're making up stories to promote an unknown teenager. But when my beatification is official, when the Church itself recognizes my sainthood, then your testimony will have the necessary weight and credibility. People will say, look, she knew Blessed Carlo. She saw His Holiness before anyone, and he appeared to her with prophecies that were fulfilled. That will give hope to millions. He paused, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. I have to go now, he said, standing up. But before I leave, can I give you something? What? I asked. He extended his right hand towards me, palm up. Give me your hand. Sister Maria. With trembling hands, I extended my hand and placed my palm on his. Immediately, I felt something. It wasn't physical heat. It was something different, like energy or peace or liquid love flowing from his hand to mine. It was the most beautiful sensation I had ever experienced, as if every cell in my body awakened simultaneously to God's presence. This is the love of Jesus in the Eucharist, Carlo said softly. This is what I felt every time I came here in the early mornings. This is what you will feel again when you receive communion tomorrow at Mass. Your spiritual dryness is over, Sister Maria. From now on, every time you doubt, remember this moment, remember this sensation, and know with absolute certainty that He is present. He withdrew his hand, and the sensation slowly faded, though it left a residue, like perfume that remains after someone leaves a room. Carlo walked to the front of the chapel, made one last profound genuflection before the tabernacle, and then turned to look at me one final time. Sister Maria, we will see each other again, not here, not like this, but when you reach the end of your earthly life, I'll be there to receive you along with all the saints. And that day you'll understand that every moment of pain, every dark night, every doubt and every tear had a perfect purpose in God's plan. And then, before my eyes, He simply faded away. He didn't disappear abruptly like a light being turned off, but gradually became less solid, more translucent, until finally nothing remained except the aroma of lilies floating in the air. I remained in that pew until dawn broke completely, around 6:30 a.m. I didn't move a muscle. I didn't pray formally. I just existed in that space of absolute wonder, processing the impossible that I had just witnessed. When I finally left the chapel, the outside world seemed different, more vibrant, more real. Colors were brighter, sounds clearer. It was as if I had lived my entire life with a gray filter over reality, and suddenly that filter had been removed. I returned to the convent for morning Mass. When I received communion, just as Carlo had promised, I felt that presence again. Not as intense as when I touched his hand, but definitely present. Jesus was there, real, alive, in that piece of consecrated bread. And for the first time in years, I cried during Mass, not from desperation, but from absolute joy. But I decided not to tell anyone about the apparition, not yet. Carlo had said I should wait until 2020, until his beatification. So I kept the secret, wrote it in my private journal with every detail, and waited. The following months were of radical transformation. My prayer life, which had been so dead, came alive. The Eucharist became the absolute center of my existence. I began to understand what Carlo had experienced all those early mornings, that real presence of Christ in the sacrament. And then, exactly as Carlo had prophesied, things began to be fulfilled. In March 2009, My sister Elena called the convent Mother Superior asking to speak urgently with me. When they put me on the phone, her voice was broken. Maria, Marco had a terrible motorcycle accident last night. He hit a truck head-on. He's in intensive care with severe brain trauma. The doctors say he might not wake up. My heart stopped, instantly remembering Carlo's words. In 2009, your nephew Marco is going to be in a terrible motorcycle accident. The doctors will say he has severe brain trauma, that he'll never wake up from the coma. For the next 8 weeks, Marco lay in a coma. The doctors performed multiple surgeries to relieve brain pressure. The scans showed extensive damage to frontal and parietal lobes. Dr. Martinelli, the neurosurgeon, finally called the family together on May 15, 2009. Elena, he said with professional gravity but compassion, Marco's brain injury is severe. He's been in a coma for 2 months with no signs of improvement. The brain scans show significant damage to areas controlling consciousness and cognition. Statistically, patients who don't show improvement after this long rarely recover meaningful brain function. You need to consider making some difficult decisions. My family collapsed again. Elena couldn't stop crying. My brother-in-law Giuseppe, always the strong one, left the room, and I found him later in the parking lot, leaning against the car, sobbing. But I had something they didn't have, absolute certainty in Carlo's words. That night, back in my cell at the convent, I opened my journal where I had written every word of Carlo's apparition. I reread the prophecy about Marco. Then I knelt and prayed with an intensity I had never experienced before, not with desperation, but with absolute confidence. Lord, I prayed, Carlo told me that Marco would wake up. I trust in that word. I trust in your power. Your will be done. During the following weeks, I visited Marco every day that the convent allowed. I would sit beside his bed, hold his hand, pray with him, read scripture passages about healing and hope to him. I never told the family about Carlo's prophecy because it sounded too fantastical, but I prayed with unshakable faith. On June 2nd, 2009, exactly 10 weeks after the accident, something extraordinary happened. Elena called me at 6 a.m., her voice trembling with excitement. Maria, Marco moved his fingers. The nurse saw it and called the doctor. They're doing tests now. By noon that same day, Marco had opened his eyes. By evening, he was speaking simple words. Within a week, he was sitting up, talking normally, asking for pizza. The neurological tests showed no cognitive damage, no motor function loss, no speech problems. Dr. Martinelli was completely baffled. He wrote in his medical report, unexpected complete neurological recovery from severe traumatic brain injury with extended coma. Clinical outcome inconsistent with initial imaging and prognosis. Recovery mechanism unexplained. When Marco was discharged 2 weeks later, completely normal, Elena hugged me crying. Maria, I know you prayed for him. The nurses told me you came every day. But it's more than that. This is a miracle. Doctors don't understand it. Something supernatural happened. Yes, I said softly, tears streaming down my face. Something very supernatural. Now 15 years later in 2024, Marco is alive, completely healthy, married with 2 beautiful children. He graduated university, became an engineer, and every year on June 2nd, the anniversary of his awakening, he comes to our convent chapel and lights a candle before a picture of CARLO ACUTIS that now hangs there. The second prophecy began to unfold exactly as Carlo had predicted in 2012. On December 23rd, around 11:30 p.m., I was in the chapel for my regular night adoration shift when I heard someone enter. It was unusual because most people don't come so late, especially on the night before Christmas Eve. I looked up and saw a young man, probably early 20s, with disheveled hair and wearing a worn leather jacket. He looked exhausted, his eyes red as if he'd been crying. He didn't bless himself with holy water like most people do. Instead, he just stood at the back of the chapel, staring at the tabernacle with an expression I can only describe as desperate rage. Something about him alarmed me, but I felt a strong interior impulse to wait, to watch. This wasn't just someone who had wandered in by accident. After about 10 minutes, he started walking toward the front pews, but instead of sitting, he knelt on the floor in front of the tabernacle and began speaking in a low, angry voice. "God," he said, his voice trembling with emotion, "if you exist, if you're really in there like they say, then you know what I'm planning to do tomorrow night. You know I have everything ready. You know I can't take this anymore." His voice broke. "My parents hate me because I don't believe. My girlfriend left me because I'm too negative. I'm failing university because nothing makes sense anymore. And you just sit there silent if you even exist." My heart broke listening to him. This was clearly the young man Carlo had told me about. Luca, age 22, from an atheist family studying computer science, planning suicide for Christmas Eve. The timing, the details, everything matched perfectly. He continued talking to God, or to the tabernacle, for another 15 minutes, his voice shifting between anger and desperate pleading. "Everyone says you love us, that you have a plan, that prayer works. But I felt nothing but emptiness for months. I've prayed, God. I've tried to believe, but you never answered. So tomorrow night, I'm done. I'm sorry if that disappoints you, but I can't keep living like this." He stood up to leave, and I knew this was my moment. Carlo had told me this would happen, that I would be there, that sharing his testimony would save this young man's life. "Wait," I called out softly. He froze and turned around, surprised to see me. In the dim candlelight, I could see tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry, sister," he said, clearly embarrassed. "I didn't know anyone was here. I'll go." "Please don't go," I said gently. "I think God arranged for me to be here tonight specifically to meet you. What's your name?" "Luca," he said, confirming what I already knew. "And before you give me some religious speech about how God loves me and everything will be fine, save your breath. I've heard it all before." "Actually," I said, standing up and walking closer to him, "I want to tell you a story about a boy who died when he was 15, and how he appeared to me in this very chapel 6 years ago to prepare me for this exact moment." Luca's eyes widened. "What?" For the next hour, I told Luca everything. Carlo's morning visits, his impossible knowledge of my spiritual crisis, his appearance after his death, the 3 prophecies, and how the first 2 had already been fulfilled exactly as he predicted. I showed him the picture of Carlo that now hung in our chapel, told him about my nephew Marco's miraculous recovery. Luca listened with growing amazement. When I finished, he was silent for several minutes. "Sister," he finally said, "I don't understand how this is possible, but what you're telling me, some of those details about spiritual emptiness, about feeling like God is silent, that's exactly what I'm going through. And you're saying this Carlo guy predicted that you would meet someone like me tonight?" "Not someone like you, Luca. You specifically. He told me your name, your age, your field of study, your family background, and that you would come here on December 23rd, planning to end your life on Christmas Eve." Luca's hands started shaking. "This is impossible. How could someone who died in 2006 know about me in 2012? Because from heaven's perspective, time is different. Past, present, and future exist simultaneously. Carlo could see your life because from eternity's viewpoint, it's all already written." We talked until dawn. I told Luca about the Eucharist, about how Carlo experienced Jesus as truly present in the consecrated bread, about how that same presence was available to him if he was willing to open his heart. I explained that his spiritual emptiness wasn't proof that God didn't exist, but rather that his soul was hungry for something the world couldn't provide. "Luca, I said as the sun began to rise. "Carlo told me that not only would meeting you save your life, but that you would become a priest and eventually found a digital ministry reaching millions. I know that sounds crazy right now, but everything else he predicted has come true, exactly as he said." Luca laughed bitterly. "Sister, I can barely believe in God, let alone become a priest. I study computer programming. I don't even go to church." "Carlo also loved computers," I said softly. "He spent hours creating websites about Eucharistic miracles, using technology to share his faith. He always said God could use anything, even our hobbies and talents, for his glory." That Christmas Eve, instead of ending his life as he had planned, Luca came to our Christmas midnight mass. He didn't take communion. He said he wasn't ready, but he stayed for the entire service. I could see him crying during several parts, especially when we sang Silent Night. After Mass, he approached me. "Sister Maria, I don't understand what's happening to me. For the first time in months, I feel something. Not happiness exactly, but hope, like maybe there's a reason to keep going." "That's Jesus calling to your heart, Luca. The same Jesus that Carlo loved so much in the Eucharist." During the following months, Luca began coming to our chapel regularly. Not every day like Carlo had, but 2 or 3 times per week. He would sit in the same pew where Carlo used to sit, trying to experience that presence Carlo had told me about. It wasn't immediate. For weeks, Luca felt mostly confusion and doubt. But gradually, something shifted. He started attending daily Mass. He began reading scripture and books about the faith. Most importantly, he started helping me with the chapel's small website, using his programming skills to create an online prayer request system. "Sister," he told me one day in March 2013, "I think I understand what Carlo experienced. Yesterday during Mass, when the priest elevated the host, I felt. It's hard to explain, but I felt like someone was looking at me with complete love. Not judgment, not disappointment, just pure love, and I knew it was Jesus." By 2014, Luca had entered the seminary. His parents were furious. They had raised him to be a rational atheist, and now their son was becoming a priest. But Luca was certain of his calling. "Sister Maria," he told me before leaving for the seminary, "Carlo was right. God can transform anyone, even a depressed atheist computer programmer." Luca was ordained as Father Luca Benedetti in 2020, and just as Carlo had prophesied, he immediately began using his technical skills for evangelization. He started with a YouTube channel called Tech Priest, where he discussed how faith and science could work together. Then came a website, podcasts, and social media presence. But the real breakthrough came in 2022 when Father Luca launched Digital Calvary, an interactive online platform where young people could ask questions about faith, request prayers, and connect with mentors. Within 2 years, the platform had over 3 million users worldwide. Young atheists, agnostics, and believers struggling with doubt found community and answers there. By 2024, Father Luca's digital ministry had indeed reached millions, exactly as Carlo had predicted 18 years earlier. And it all started with a young man planning suicide who met a nun in a chapel on the night before Christmas Eve. The third prophecy about Carlo's beatification began manifesting in ways I never could have imagined. Starting around 2015, I began hearing about CARLO ACUTIS through different channels. Catholic news websites mentioned him as a candidate for sainthood. Young people on social media started sharing stories about him. His mother, Andrea, had written a book about his life that was gaining popularity. But what really caught my attention was how his story was spreading among teenagers and young adults. I would see young people coming to our chapel wearing jeans and sneakers, clearly inspired by Carlo's casual style. Some carried laptops or tablets, trying to combine technology with prayer, just as he had done. One day in 2017, a group of university students from Rome visited our chapel. They were part of something they called the CARLO ACUTIS youth movement. Young Catholics who were trying to live out his example of combining modern life with deep faith. When they heard that Sister Maria Benedetti was present, my story about knowing Carlo was slowly becoming known in certain Catholic circles. They asked to speak with me. Sister, and to place the baptizing leader, a young woman named Julia, we've heard that you actually knew Carlo when he was alive. Is that true? I had been carefully sharing limited parts of my story for several years, always with permission from church authorities, but never the full testimony with the apparition. Yes, I said, I knew Carlo. He used to come to our chapel for early morning adoration. What was he really like? Asked Marco, one of the young men. I mean, beyond the official stories, as a person. He was exactly as you'd expect from reading about him, I said truthfully. Completely normal and completely extraordinary at the same time. He loved technology, wore ordinary clothes, but prayed with an intensity I've never seen before or since. And he had this ability to see people's spiritual needs, to know exactly what someone needed to hear. Did he ever talk about becoming a saint? Asked another student. I smiled, remembering his words in the apparition. By 2020, I will be beatified by the Catholic Church. But I couldn't share that yet. He never talked about personal holiness in a prideful way. But he did say once that he believed God wanted to use him to help young people find faith through modern means. What amazed me was how these young people were already living out Carlo's vision. Julia showed me her Instagram account, where she posted daily Bible verses with beautiful graphics. Marco had a TikTok channel where he explained Catholic teachings in simple terms. Another student, Sophia, ran a Discord server where young Catholics from around the world gathered for online prayer groups. Sister, Julia says, we feel like Carlo is interceding for all of us. When we pray for his intercession, amazing things happen. I was failing university, but after I asked for his help, I somehow understood all my difficult courses. Marco was in a terrible car accident, but walked away without a scratch after his family prayed to Carlo. We're collecting testimonies of people who've been helped by asking for his prayers. I was fascinated. Even before his official beatification, Carlo was already functioning as an intercessor for young people around the world. It was exactly what he had told me would happen. In 2018, I received permission from the church to publish a small book about my memories of Carlo, titled Morning Encounters, Remembering CARLO ACUTIS. I was careful to include only what I had observed directly, his prayer life, his joy, his wisdom beyond his years, without mentioning the apparition. But even that limited testimony had a powerful impact. Letters and emails began arriving from around the world. Parents wrote that their teenage children had read the book and suddenly became interested in going to Mass. Young adults shared that they had started daily Eucharistic adoration after reading about Carlo's practice. Priests wrote that they were seeing an increase in young people at daily Mass. But the most moving letters came from young people themselves. A girl from Ireland wrote, Sister Maria, I was planning to stop going to church because it seemed boring and irrelevant. But after reading about Carlo, I realized that faith doesn't have to be boring. Now I bring my laptop to adoration and create digital artwork inspired by scripture, a young man from Brazil wrote. I was addicted to video games and completely neglected my spiritual life. But when I learned that Carlo loved technology, but loved Jesus even more, I started limiting my gaming time and spending that time in prayer instead. In 2019, as the beatification process entered its final stages, I was contacted by the Vatican's Congregation for the Causes of Saints. They had read my book and wanted to interview me as part of their investigation into Carlo's life and virtues. I traveled to Rome and spent 3 days answering detailed questions about my interactions with Carlo. Cardinal Angelo Amato, who was overseeing the process, asked me, Sister Maria, in your observations of Carlo, Did you ever witness anything you would consider supernatural or miraculous? This was the moment I had been waiting for, but I still couldn't share the full story. Your Eminence, I said carefully, Carlo had an extraordinary ability to perceive people's spiritual needs and to know things he couldn't have known through natural means. I believe he had a special gift of spiritual insight. Can you give a specific example? He once told me details about my personal spiritual struggles that I had never shared with anyone. His insights were so accurate and helpful that they led to a complete transformation in my spiritual life. The Cardinal made detailed notes. Later, I learned that similar testimonies from many other people had been collected. Accounts of Carlo's unusual spiritual perceptiveness, his ability to console people going through difficulties, his seemingly prophetic insights about people's lives. On October the 1st, 2020, the announcement came. Carlo Acutis would be beatified on October 10th in Assisi. I remember exactly where I was when I heard the news, in our chapel during evening prayer. I had to excuse myself and go to my cell because I started crying uncontrollably. Finally, it was time. 14 years after Carlo had told me, when my beatification is official, that's the moment you should begin sharing this testimony, the moment had arrived. I traveled to Assisi for the beatification ceremony, along with hundreds of thousands of other pilgrims, most of them young people. The atmosphere was extraordinary, like a massive youth festival combined with a deeply sacred ceremony. Young people from every continent, many wearing jeans and sneakers in Carlo's honor, gathered to witness their peer become blessed Carlo Acutis. The most moving moment was when they unveiled Carlo's incorrupt body in the sanctuary of spoliation. There he was, 14 years after his death, perfectly preserved. His face had that same peaceful smile I remembered from our encounters in the chapel. The young people around me gasped in amazement, many crying, many taking out their phones to capture the moment. After the ceremony, I managed to approach Carlo's tomb when the crowds had thinned. I knelt there and whispered, "Carlo, it's time. You told me that when you were beatified I should share the full testimony, but I'm scared. Will people believe? Will it help anyone?" And just like that night in 2006, I felt his presence so clearly. Not a visible apparition this time, but an unmistakable sense that he was there, and I heard, not with my ears, but in my heart, his familiar voice. "Sister Maria, don't worry about who believes. Tell the truth with love. The people who need to hear it will recognize it as true. It's time to let the world know that heaven is real and that I'm still working." I returned to Rome with absolute certainty about what I needed to do. Over the following months, I wrote the complete account, the apparition, the 3 prophecies, their exact fulfillment, everything Carlo had told me about the supernatural world, about the reality of the saints' intercession, about the true presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. I submitted the complete testimony to church authorities. After extensive investigation, including psychological evaluation and theological review, the church gave me permission to share the full story publicly. The investigators concluded that my account was coherent, credible, and contained no elements contrary to Catholic doctrine. In October 2021, exactly 1 year after Carlo's beatification, I released the complete testimony. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within days, the video had millions of views. Comments poured in from around the world. Young people sharing their own miraculous encounters with Blessed Carlo. Parents reporting that their children had returned to the faith. Priests describing increased attendance at Eucharistic adoration. But perhaps the most significant response came from other young saints in heaven. I began receiving messages from people around the world, reporting that after learning about Carlo through my testimony, they had started experiencing intercession from other young saints. Saint Jose Sanchez del Rio, Saint Francisco, and Jacinta Marto, Saint Therese of Lisieux when she was young. It was as if Carlo's beatification had opened a floodgate of young saints interceding for this generation. What happened next defied every expectation I could have had. The testimony didn't just go viral in Catholic circles. It spread across all demographics. Atheist YouTubers created response videos, some skeptical, but others surprisingly open. Major news outlets picked up the story. Netflix approached me about creating a documentary series. But the real impact was in the personal testimonies that began flooding in. I started receiving hundreds of emails daily from people around the world, sharing how Blessed Carlo had interceded in their lives after they watched my testimony. Maria Santos from Mexico City wrote, "Sister, I was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer last year. After watching your video, I started praying to Blessed Carlo every day. 3 months later, my latest scans showed the tumors had shrunk by 80%. My oncologist said he's never seen anything like it." James Wilson from London shared, "I was a complete atheist, mocked my Catholic girlfriend for her beliefs. But after watching your testimony, something changed in me. I couldn't stop thinking about Carlo's words about the Eucharist. Last month I was baptized and confirmed. My girlfriend and I are getting married in a Catholic ceremony next spring." Dr. Rebecca Thompson, a neurosurgeon from Chicago, wrote, "As a scientist, I'm trained to be skeptical of miraculous claims, but I had to write to tell you about something extraordinary. We had a teenage patient, similar age to Carlo when he died, with an inoperable brain tumor. The family asked me to pray to Blessed Carlo with them. I reluctantly agreed. 3 days later, follow-up imaging showed the tumor had completely disappeared. I've been practicing medicine for 20 years and have never seen anything like this." The testimonies kept coming. Addictions broken, marriages healed, depression lifted, financial crises resolved, academic struggles overcome. But they all had the same pattern. Someone in desperation would watch my testimony, begin praying to Blessed Carlo, and experience what could only be described as miraculous intervention. In 2022, I was invited to speak at the Vatican's World Youth Day preparation event. Cardinal Luis Ladaria, the prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, introduced me by saying, "Sister Maria's testimony reminds us that the communion of saints is not an abstract doctrine, but a living reality. Through Blessed CARLO ACUTIS, heaven continues to touch earth in ways that speak specifically to young people of the digital age." During my presentation, I shared the most recent developments in Carlo's intercession. A team of researchers at the Pontifical Gregorian University had begun documenting the miraculous testimonies associated with Carlo's intercession. They had collected over 10 doan detailed accounts from verified sources worldwide. "What we're seeing," explained Dr. Paolo Martinelli, the lead researcher, "is unprecedented in the modern history of the Church. Never before has a single blessed received such an immediate and massive response from young people globally. The cases range from physical healings to psychological transformations to spiritual conversions, but they all share common characteristics. The petitioners are typically under 30. They learned about Blessed Carlo through digital media, and the intercessions often involve technology or digital elements. One case particularly moved me. A young man named David Chen from Singapore had been cyberbullied so severely that he developed severe anxiety and depression. He had quit university, stopped leaving his apartment, and was contemplating suicide. His sister sent him my testimony video as a last desperate attempt to help. David wrote to me, "Sister Maria, after watching your video, I felt like Carlo understood what it meant to be young in the digital age. All the pressures, the loneliness, the way technology can both connect and isolate us. I started praying to him daily, asking for strength to face my online bullies and rebuild my life. Within a month, something amazing happened. My anxiety levels dropped dramatically. I found the courage to restart my studies. But more importantly, I felt called to use my tech skills for good. I'm now developing an app to help other cyberbullying victims connect with mental health resources and peer support groups. This became a recurring theme. Young people who experienced CARLO's intercession often felt called to use their own talents and skills to help others, especially through technology and digital platforms. In 2023, an unexpected development occurred. The Church announced that the cause for CARLO's canonization would be expedited due to the overwhelming evidence of his continued intercession. Typically, there's a much longer waiting period between beatification and canonization, but the sheer volume of documented miracles was unprecedented. Cardinal Roberto Sarra, commenting on the decision, said, "Blessed Carlo Acutis represents exactly what the Church needs for the new evangelization. A saint who speaks the language of young people, who shows them that holiness and modernity are not only compatible, but can enhance each other." But it wasn't just the quantity of miracles that impressed Church authorities. It was their quality and verifiability. Dr. Anna Silvia Rossi, the Vatican's chief medical consultant for miracle investigations, explained, "The cases associated with Blessed Carlo's intercession are remarkably well documented. In the digital age, people naturally document their struggles and healing journeys through photos, videos, medical records, and social media posts. This provides an unprecedented level of evidence for miraculous interventions. As we approached 2024, I began to feel that my mission was evolving. Carlo had originally asked me to share the testimony to help people recover their faith and understand the reality of the supernatural world. But now I sensed he wanted me to do something more. During my night adoration on November 15th, 2023, exactly 17 years after Carlo's first apparition to me, I felt his presence again. Not a visual apparition, but that unmistakable sense of him being there that I had learned to recognize over the years. In my heart, I heard his voice clearly. "Sister Maria, the testimony was just the beginning. Now I need you to help establish something permanent. Young people around the world are experiencing my intercession, but they need a place to gather, to share their stories, to support each other in living out the faith I showed them was possible." Over the following months, working with Father Luca, the young man Carlo had predicted I would save from suicide, and several other priests and lay people who had been touched by Carlo's story, we established the Blessed Carlo Acutis International Youth Network. The network combined physical and digital elements, just as Carlo would have wanted. We created local chapters in major cities where young people could meet for Eucharistic adoration, community service projects, and faith sharing. But we also developed a sophisticated digital platform where young people from anywhere in the world could connect, share testimonies of Carlo's intercession, request prayers, and find mentorship in living out their faith in the modern world. The response was immediate and powerful. Within 6 months, we had active chapters in over 200 cities worldwide and more than 500 0 registered users on the digital platform. Young people were sharing testimonies daily, organizing virtual and physical prayer groups, and most importantly, living out their faith with the kind of joy and authenticity that Carlo had modeled. One of our most active members, Sarah Martinez from Los Angeles, shared, "Before I discovered Blessed Carlo through Sister Maria's testimony, I thought being Catholic meant being weird and old-fashioned. But Carlo showed me that you can love Jesus and still be completely yourself. Use social media, enjoy technology, dress normally, and connect with your generation." Now I run our local chapter and help other young people discover that faith isn't about giving up who you are, but becoming the best version of who you're meant to be. In late 2023, something extraordinary began happening that even I, after all these years of witnessing Carlo's continued intercession, was unprepared for. Young people around the world started reporting not just answered prayers through Carlo's intercession, but actual apparitions and visions of him. The first verified case came from Manila, Philippines. A 16-year-old girl named Isabela Santos was in the hospital dying from complications of dengue fever. Her family had watched my testimony and were praying desperately to Blessed Carlo for her healing. On December the 12th, the feast of Our Lady of Guadalupe, Isabella later testified that she saw a young man in jeans and a hoodie standing beside her hospital bed. He looked exactly like the pictures of Blessed Carlo, Isabella told me when I interviewed her via video call. He smiled and said, "Don't be afraid, Isabella. Jesus wants you to live because you have work to do for him. You're going to help many young people find their way back to faith." Then he touched my forehead, and I felt this incredible warmth and peace. When the doctors checked Isabella the next morning, her fever had broken, her platelet count had normalized, and all signs of dengue complications had disappeared. She made a complete recovery and is now studying to become a nurse, specifically to work with sick children. But what made Isabella's case particularly significant was that it was captured on the hospital's security cameras. The footage clearly shows Isabella, who appeared to be unconscious, suddenly sitting up in bed and reaching out her hand as if greeting someone. For approximately 3 minutes, she appears to be having a conversation with an invisible presence. Then she lies back down peacefully and falls into natural sleep. Dr. Manuel Rodriguez, Isabella's physician and a skeptical Catholic, submitted his own testimony to church authorities. As a medical professional, I have no scientific explanation for Isabella's recovery. Dengue complications at her stage are typically fatal or leave permanent damage. But more disturbing to my rational worldview is what I observed on the security footage. I watched that girl interact with someone who wasn't there and then experience immediate physiological changes that led to complete healing. Similar cases began occurring worldwide. In Dublin, Ireland, a young man named Patrick O'Connor, addicted to drugs and homeless, reported that Carlo appeared to him in an alley and told him exactly which rehabilitation center to go to and what he needed to say to get admitted. Patrick is now 2 years clean and works as a peer counselor for other addicts. In São Paulo, Brazil, a teenage girl named Ana Clara was about to abort her pregnancy when she reported that Carlo appeared to her in the clinic waiting room and showed her a vision of her future son becoming a priest. She chose to continue the pregnancy and is now raising her healthy 2-year-old son while studying theology. The church established a special commission to investigate these apparitions. Cardinal José Tolentino de Mendonça, who headed the investigation, told me during one of our interviews, "Sister Maria, what we're witnessing is unprecedented in church history. Never before has a blessed or a saint appeared so frequently and to so many different people in such a short time period. It's as if heaven has opened a special channel of communication for this generation." What struck the investigators most was the consistency of the messages across all the reported apparitions. Carlo's words always focused on the same themes: the reality of Jesus' presence in the Eucharist, the call to use modern technology for evangelization, the importance of joy and authenticity in living the faith, and the urgency of reaching young people before they lose hope entirely. In January 2024, I received the most remarkable call of my life. It was from the Vatican's Secretary of State, Cardinal Pietro Parolin. "Sister Maria," he said, "His Holiness Pope Francis would like to meet with you personally. He's been following the developments with Blessed Carlo's intercessions and apparitions, and he wants to hear your complete testimony directly." 3 weeks later, I found myself in the papal apartment, sitting across from Pope Francis himself. For 2 hours, I recounted everything: Carlo's original apparition to me in 2006, the 3 fulfilled prophecies, the explosion of miraculous intercessions following his beatification, and the recent wave of apparitions to young people worldwide. Pope Francis listened intently, occasionally asking for clarification or details. When I finished, he was quiet for several minutes, clearly deep in thought. Sister Maria, he finally said, what you have shared confirms something I have been sensing in my own prayers. Blessed Carlo Acutis is not just another saint for our times. He is God's answer to the crisis of faith among young people in the digital age. Through him, heaven is reaching out to a generation that feels disconnected from traditional forms of spirituality. The Pope then shared something that stunned me. I must confess to you that I myself have experienced dreams where a young man, matching Carlo's description, gives me specific guidance about how to reach young people with the gospel. I hadn't spoken of this to anyone because I wasn't certain of the source. But your testimony helps me understand that these may have been authentic communications. Pope Francis then made an announcement that would change everything. I am instructing the Congregation for the Causes of Saints to prepare immediately for Carlo's canonization. The evidence of his continued intercession and the urgent need of young people for his example compel us to move forward without delay. I also want you to work directly with the Vatican to establish an official international center for Blessed Carlo Acutis, headquartered here in Rome, but with a global digital presence. On March 19, 2024, the Feast of St. Joseph, Pope Francis announced to the world that Blessed Carlo Acutis would be canonized on October 12, 2024, the 18th anniversary of his death. The announcement sent shockwaves throughout the Catholic world and beyond. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Young people from every continent began planning pilgrimages to Rome for the canonization. The Saspoini St. Carlo Acutis hashtag began trending globally on social media. Airlines reported unprecedented bookings from young travelers heading to Italy. But more importantly, the announcement seemed to trigger an even greater wave of miraculous intercessions. The International Center for Blessed Carlo Acutis, which we had hastily established in a Vatican office building, was receiving over 1,000 testimonies of answered prayers daily. Dr. Sarah Williams, a psychiatrist from London, submitted one of the most moving testimonies. My 17-year-old daughter, Emma, had been battling severe depression and had attempted suicide twice. After we learned about the upcoming canonization, we began praying to Blessed Carlo every day. Within 2 weeks, Emma experienced what she described as a complete lifting of the darkness. She's now back in school, actively involved in our parish youth group, and wants to study psychology to help other young people with mental health struggles. Similar stories poured in from around the world. Young people experiencing depression, anxiety, addiction, family problems, academic failures, and spiritual crises were finding hope and healing through Carlo's intercession at an unprecedented rate. As we approached the canonization date, I reflected on the incredible journey that had begun 18 years earlier in that Roman chapel. Carlo had told me that sharing my testimony would help thousands recover their faith. But the reality had far exceeded even his predictions. Millions of young people worldwide had been touched by his story and intercession. The night before the canonization, I returned to Sant'Eustachio for one final night adoration before everything changed. As I knelt in the same spot where Carlo had first appeared to me, I felt his presence one last time. "Sister Maria," I heard in my heart, "thank you for being faithful to the mission I gave you. Tomorrow, when I'm declared a saint, my real work begins. What you've seen these past years is just the beginning. I'm going to help bring about the greatest revival of faith among young people in church history." And somehow, in the depth of my heart, I knew he was right. October 12th, 2024. St. Peter's Square had never seen anything like it. Over 2 million people gathered for Carlo's canonization. But what was truly unprecedented was the demographics. 80% of the crowd was under 30. They came from every continent, speaking dozens of languages, but united by their shared experience of Carlo's intercession and their determination to live out his example of joyful, authentic faith. I had a place of honor near the altar, along with Carlo's parents, Andrea and Andrea Acutis, who had become like family to me over the years. As Pope Francis spoke the formal words declaring Carlo Acutis a saint of the Catholic Church, the crowd erupted in a sound I had never heard before. Not just applause, but a roar of triumph and joy that seemed to shake the very foundations of St. Peter's Basilica. Today, Pope Francis proclaimed, we celebrate St. Carlo Acutis, patron saint of the Internet and model for young people in the digital age. He shows us that holiness in the 21st century doesn't require abandoning modernity, but rather baptizing it with authentic love for Jesus Christ. When the ceremony concluded, something extraordinary happened. Young people from the crowd began sharing testimonies spontaneously, using megaphones and social media live streams to broadcast their stories of Carlo's intercession around the world. Maria Gonzalez from Mexico shouted into a megaphone, "Saint Carlo Acutis healed my brother of leukemia, the same disease that took him to heaven." James Murphy from Ireland live streamed on TikTok, "I was addicted to pornography for 8 years. 1 month of praying to Saint Carlo, and I'm completely free." Chen Wei from China used Instagram Live to share, "My parents forbade me from being Catholic, but after Saint Carlo's intercession, they not only gave permission, but asked to learn about faith themselves." The celebrations continued for days. Young people who had traveled from around the world didn't want to leave Rome. They organized spontaneous prayer gatherings, visited every church where Carlo had prayed, and created what media outlets called the largest youth Catholic revival in modern history. But for me personally, the most moving moment came 3 days after the canonization. I was back in Rome, preparing to return to my convent, when I received an urgent call from Dr. Martinelli, the neurosurgeon who had treated my nephew Marco 15 years earlier. "Sister Maria," his voice was trembling with excitement, "something incredible has happened. Do you remember Elena Rossi, the young woman who was in a coma for 3 months after a cycling accident? We performed the surgery yesterday, but the brain damage was extensive. This morning, her family was praying to St. Carlo Acutis at her bedside when she suddenly opened her eyes and spoke. Her first words were, 'The young man in jeans said I have work to do for Jesus. Sister, she's showing no signs of cognitive damage, despite massive brain trauma.' I wasn't surprised. This was Carlo's way, always working, always interceding, always bringing hope to desperate families. Over the following months, the impact of Carlo's canonization became clear. The Church reported the largest increase in young adult mass attendance in over 50 years. Seminaries worldwide saw their highest enrollment numbers since the 1960s. Most significantly, mental health organizations noted a dramatic decrease in suicide rates among teenagers and young adults in predominantly Catholic regions. The International Center for St. Carlo Acutis became the fastest-growing Catholic organization in history. Within 6 months of his canonization, we had active chapters in over 1,000 cities and more than 10 million registered members on our digital platform. But perhaps the most beautiful development was what young people began calling Carlo communities, small groups of friends who committed to living out Carlo's example together. They would meet weekly for Eucharistic adoration, use their digital skills for evangelization projects, and support each other in growing in faith while staying fully engaged with modern culture. Sarah Kim from Seoul, Korea, wrote to me, "Sister Maria, our Carlo community has 15 members, all university students. We've created a K-pop style music video explaining the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist that has over 3 million views. We're proving that you can be cool, relevant, and deeply Catholic all at the same time, just like St. Carlo." In December 2024, I received what I consider the ultimate confirmation that Carlo's mission was being fulfilled. A global survey conducted by the Vatican's Pontifical Council for the New Evangelization found that 68% of Catholics between ages 6 to 29 reported that their faith had been positively influenced by learning about St. Carlo Acutis. More remarkably, A 34% said they had experienced what they believed to be his direct intercession in their lives. Dr. Roberto Silva, who led the research, explained, "What we're seeing is unprecedented in the sociology of religion. A single saint is single-handedly reversing decades of declining youth participation in organized religion. Saint CARLO ACUTIS has become the bridge between traditional Catholic faith and digital age spirituality." As I write this in late 2024, 18 years after that life-changing apparition in Santi Eustachio Chapel, I am overwhelmed by the fulfillment of every word Carlo spoke to me that November night. He told me that sharing my testimony would help thousands recover their faith, but millions have been touched. He predicted that young people would find in him a model for living authentic faith in the modern world, and they have, in numbers that boggle the mind. Most importantly, he promised that through his intercession, people would come to understand that death is not the end, that heaven is real, that the saints intercede for us, and that Jesus is truly present in the Eucharist. All of this has been proven beyond doubt through the countless miracles, apparitions, and transformed lives associated with his sainthood. But my dear brother, my dear sister, if you have listened to this entire testimony, it's because St. Carlo brought you here. Not the YouTube algorithm, not chance, not curiosity, but divine providence guided by a saint who is very much alive and active in heaven. Let me tell you what St. Carlo wants you to know right now, in this moment as you hear these words. First, if you're struggling with faith, if you feel distant from God, if you think the church is irrelevant or boring, you are exactly who Carlo lived and died for. He was a normal teenager who found extraordinary joy in something as simple as going to Mass every day. He proved that faith isn't about being perfect or old-fashioned or weird. It's about discovering that Jesus Christ is alive, present, and madly in love with you personally. Second, if you're young and feel like your generation has been written off by the church or by older Catholics, Carlo is your proof that young people can be saints. Not someday when you're older and more mature, but right now, exactly as you are. Carlo was canonized for what he did as a teenager. Your age is not a limitation, it's your superpower. Third, if you feel called to do something radical for God, but you're scared, Carlo's message to you is don't be afraid. He went from being a normal kid who loved video games to being a saint whose intercession is changing millions of lives. God has a plan for you that is more beautiful and impactful than you could ever imagine. But it requires saying yes, even when you can't see the whole picture. Now I'm going to ask you to do something specific, something that I believe Saint Carlo himself is asking through me. First, subscribe to this channel and share this video. Not for my sake, but because there are people in your life who desperately need to hear that miracles are real, that saints intercede, that heaven exists, and that they are loved beyond measure. St. Carlo wants to reach them through you. Second, find a Catholic church this week and spend at least 15 minutes before the tabernacle where the Blessed Sacrament is kept. You don't.